Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Buhle Madulini from the Sports Desk. As mentioned by Mpho, I'll be speaking to the chairman of Boxing South Africa, Luthando Jack. He actually joins me on the line via Zoom. It's very good to have you on the line. It's a pleasure speaking to you on a Saturday morning, Mr. Jack. Let's get straight into it. I want to ask you about, Boxing South Africa. It's been a tough ride over the last couple of years, but let's quickly focus on the last maybe years or so with COVID. How has it been for the federation?
Thanks, Koshe, for having us. Good morning. It's been really tough, for the sport. We have been affected just like any other sport. For instance, just after we've been allowed to bring boxers back, into the ring. Of course, under very strict COVID rules. We've had between October and December 8 tournaments, down from 20, in 2019. So really, the impact has been quite heavy, particularly on our athletes, the boxers, because most of our boxers, professional boxers, boxing is their only source of livelihood.
Now, of course, you mentioned that it's the only source of livelihood, but as it stands at the moment, boxers aren't really making a lot of money. How have you been able to support them, even within COVID, but even before we were in this pandemic, just to ensure that our boxers are able to live and continue training?
What we've done as part of, for instance, in the context of COVID, of safe return of our boxers, to the gyms, as well as the staging of tournaments safely. What we've done was to really support the boxing gyms, for instance, with PPE equipment. We've also been supporting because part of the requirement for boxers as they come back, into the tournament is for them to be tested. So as Boxing South Africa, part of what we have been doing is to, for instance, pay for their tests, particularly if the fights will be on national titles. And again, what we have also been doing, because the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture has called for applications, for the relief fund. So some of our licensees have benefited, from that. There's also another call that is out as we speak, and we have asked the office, for instance, to really go out there and mobilize them to apply, for this relief fund, and to also support them to ensure that their applications, are compliant, to the requirements of the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. But I must also say that the boxing fraternity out there, particularly promoters, trainers, managers, they have been really supporting some of our boxers, as well as benevolent South Africans. And we're really quite thankful, to them, for having done this, to our boxers.
Now, in 2013, there was a national boxing indaba that took place. Some resolutions were passed at that boxing indaba. It's been a long road, an arduous road since then. But since you came into power, how has it been? That checklist? How far down are you? And how many changes have you had to make very quickly?
Well, now as the new board, we've been in office for 2 months. But what we are doing is to basically reflect on how far have we come in implementing the 2013 resolutions. Work has been done in certain areas, like, for instance, we did bring back a boxing on TV in the public broadcaster, even though that has since stopped. But we are working on engagement, the public broadcaster to bring a television back on. To bring boxing back, on television, because that's quite central actually in the promotion of sport. We can only attract young people if the sport of boxing, is on television, is seen by young stars, and they get inspired. And we can also attract sponsorship, to the sport of boxing if there is visibility in terms of the quality, of the product, which is the boxer. So that is really very important, to us. We also have been able to, for instance, on an annual basis, to celebrate our athletes, through boxing awards. But of course, for the last financial year, we couldn't do that due to the advent, of COVID. But going forward, we want to reflect on that and then work on what I call a renewal, and growth, of boxing. And at the center of that, we really want to unite, the fraternity around a common vision around the futures, of boxing, in South Africa. We do think that this is an urgent task. And at the core of this, in terms of the pillars, of the renewal and growth program, one is the development, of boxing, the development of the boxer, looking at it throughout its ecosystem. For instance, building strong relationship with the amateur boxing organization in the form of SANABO, working well with trainers, and ensure that we do have a credible accreditation system and training system, for the trainers, and ensure that we really work around ensuring that there is equity in terms of the gymnasiums, in the country, so that you bridge the gap between, for instance, the world-class gymnasium that we would find in urban centers, as well as some gymnasium that you'll find in the townships, as well as in the rural areas. Because we think that's
Mr.
the
Luthando Jack,
foundation.
for the sake of time, I'm sorry to just interrupt you there, but for the sake of time, you mentioned something right at the start of your answer, saying that you want to get boxing back onto television. You've done it, in the past. But as soon as you do that, then you've got the old thing of promoters. And, we've had a lot of cries over the last couple of years that promoters are monopolizing boxing. What are you doing as Boxing South Africa to prevent such and to make sure that those opportunities are spread equally across the promoters within the association?
Yeah, part of what we did was to basically work with SABC in particular, because that's the public broadcaster. And we also engage as well SuperSport, in this regard, so that we do really have a broad framework, that really ensures that there's equitable distribution, of rights, of broadcasting rights, amongst promoters. So we did agree on that framework with SABC. We're still working on SuperSport, in this regard.
And before I let you go, I just want to quickly find out the case between the former CEO, Moffat Qeti. How's that looking at the CCMA?
Well, that's still sub judice, but what I can say is that we would want this, it's at the Labour Court actually, would want this case to be finalized as soon as possible, so that as part of our plan to stabilize, the sport of boxing. So the new board, as you know, we don't have a CEO at the present moment, and we can't stabilize boxing if at this time we don't have a stable administration. So we're working with our lawyers to expedite, the court process. But not everything is within our control, as you know that courts determine, their own processes.
Public, Mr. Jack, what can we do to support boxing South Africa?
Well, we, as I said, we would want to bring the sport back, to its stakeholders. We would want stakeholders to own, to take pride, of the sport. And our role as the board is to mobilize all stakeholders, the media, government, the entire boxing fraternity around a common vision, to renew and grow the sport and bring back, to its former glory, and ensure that really the sport, as it is a people's sport, indeed becomes the talk of the day, around townships, in taxis, in buses, and so on. That's really what we really want to do. So we would want to galvanize all our stakeholders, behind that particular vision, and that's the task that we are going to embark upon, as the new board. And it is an urgent task, but at the core of it is really unity around a common vision.
Luthando Jack, the chairman of Boxing South Africa there, thank you so much for your time, giving us just an update on the state of boxing in the country and what we need to do to get it back to its former glory days. Of course, South Africa, a very proud boxing nation, but over the last 10, 20 years or so, it hasn't been that great for South African boxing.